Okay. All right. And as I had said just a bit earlier, that we are a community that affirms the worth and dignity and uniqueness of human beings. So we ask that you put your pronouns beside your name. And that can be done by going down to the bottom of your screen where it says participants, find your name, and then let me just see here. You're going to click on let's see. I have to, yes, you're going to click on more, and then there will be a menu and find, change your name, and you can add your pronouns to that. Okay. I want to give Phyllis the opportunity right now to welcome everybody. So Phyllis, it is all yours.
Well, hello to everybody, and a very hearty welcome to this Sunday with the Susquehanna Valley Ethical Society, better known to our members as the Valley. Also, for any members who are or visitors who are watching this on the recorded version, a welcome to you also. My name's Phyllis Marquette. I have been with the Valley since October of last year. I'm currently serving on the board as the secretary, and I'm also the chair of the Ethical Action Committee. I am so very glad that you have chosen to join us this afternoon. And visitors, if you would like to receive news or further information about what we do, please just leave your contact information in the chat that you find at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to get you information on a regular basis. Just to let everyone know, the Susquehanna Valley Ethical Society is a community of all walks of life that learns and grows together through shared values, doing good, and nurturing the human spirit. We are a safe and courageous place in which members can build a community of friends, find inspiration and purpose, provide a moral education for their children, celebrate seasons and life events, and clarify worldviews. So thank you and welcome, and we're very excited about today's program.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you. I do have a few announcements to get us coming up this week. On Tuesday, September 21st, it is United Nations International Day of Peace. And the theme for this year is Recovering Better for an Equitable and Sustainable World. So let's celebrate peace by standing up against acts of hate online and offline, and by spreading compassion, kindness, and hope in the face of the pandemic as we recover. I encourage you to read the American Ethical Union's resolution that was ratified by the delegation at the American Ethical Union Assembly on August 8, 2021. The resolution is titled Renewal of Commitment to a Culture of Peace, and that can be found at aeu.org. Also, it can be found on our website, Susquehanna Valley Ethical Society.org. We, on Saturday, the 25th, we're going to have Valley Boots on the Ground, and this will be at the Lewisburg Post Office from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. We will be distributing literature about our Ethical Culture Society to people as they walk the street, letting them know about who we are and why we are in Lewisburg. So if you can join us members next Saturday, 11 a.m. to 2, it would be greatly appreciated. Next Sunday, September 26th, Our platform will be with Dr. Jay Hooper and Anthony Cruz, our intern. And I may or may not quite have the just behind the program. This is what I think it's going to be about. What is a humanist chaplain and why your university campus should have one. Am I at all close? Jay's shaking his head. Okay. Great, great. So that should be very interesting, and it'll be. I'm anxious to see that because we have been trying to figure out ways to connect with the Bucknell campus and also the campus at Susquehanna. So hoping we'll get some folks to check in with us. Seek, our children's education program, will not be meeting next Sunday. They will be back in October. Also on September 26th, we will have our very first virtual meetup of our PRISM group. PRISM is our society's teen LGBTQ+ and ally group. So we are right now connecting with some local teens who have an interest in being part of this group. We'll keep you posted on how this all transpires for us and for the teens. I also want to welcome our very special guests with us today, Dr. Carol Wayne White. Dr. White is a professor of religious studies at Bucknell University, and her talk today is titled "A New View of the Human and the Ethical Appeal of Religious Naturalism in the 21st Century." So we'll be hearing from Dr. White in just a few moments. And welcome to any parents that might be joining us, parents of the children who are outside right now with our secular ethical education teacher. Today they're continuing the theme All About Me and painting their self-portraits that they created last Sunday. So we'll be really anxious to see some of the finished portraits in a week or so. So I now turn the program over to Anthony Cruz, our intern.
Beloved community, dear listeners from near and far, in our community here at the Valley, we have an affirmation when you enter into this space. We meet to deepen our sense of the meaningfulness of life, to shine light on the ideas with which we guide our choices, to give us courage to take the higher path and to get to know one another over time in appreciation of each one's unique and incomparable worth. And together we work for a world where love and justice cross all borders. Our statement of affirmation, we affirm the worth, dignity, and uniqueness of every human being.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. Jay, do you have the video that you can share with us? I'm
actually, you know what? I'm having a glitch between two of my resources right now, which normally is not a problem.
Right.
So I have actually asked the artist, Story Michelle, who is in the place and who is able to actually have direct access to it, as well as her beloved Elise, who also filmed this wonderful video. And it's not just a video, it's really also a meditation and an archive, but I will allow for the artists to express that since they have the ability to communicate effectively about their work. And, but I will say as an inspiration that leads to this work is that I think it captures, as much as I've also been reading a little bit more and learning a lot more about Dr. Carol Wayne White's work, particularly in her book, Black Lives and Sacred Humanity, Towards an African-American Religious Humanism, which is here, and also Meaningful Flesh, which is a collection of essays that the work is located in. I'm really stuck on blending. As you know, the artist and the scholar in me loves to blend the work of scholarship and artistry together to, in many ways, bring us into a deeper conversation. So I invite you now to enjoy Story Michelle, their art, as well as the film and cinematography of Elise Ambrose, Dr. Elise Ambrose, to be correct.
Thank you, Dr. J. I don't know how to share this. Should I share the screen?
Oh,
and
please.
then
You know what, Story? I need to make you co-host. Just
Okay.
1 second.
No worries. Thank you, Patty. And while you're doing that, I just want to echo that this particular piece was actually created during the pandemic. And Elise and I were living together here in New York at the time. And we're really struggling to find grounding. There was so much happening during this time. And I think that this was in the flux of Black Lives Matter movement because of the fact that we had so many murders happening and needed to find a safe space. And we found it in the woods. We found it amongst the trees and the chipmunks and all of these reminders that we're not alone and that we're all interconnected and we need each other. So this particular piece is called A Practice in Freedom Making. It's a part of a larger project that I created called Mama Rose, which explores a non-binary team named Sid, who is learning from their trans ancestor all about what it means to truly love yourself and what it means to live your truth. So with that said, let's see, I'm going to, I hope I do this right.
You will. There, you got it.
Okay, yeah. All right, let me just make this bigger. And make sure it starts from the beginning. Okay, please let me know if you can't hear it. Can you hear the music?
Yes.
Yes.
I am light, I am light. I am light, I am light. I am not the things my family did. I am not the voices in my head. I am not the pieces of the brokenness inside. I am light. 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 I'm not the mistakes that I have made, or any of the things that caused me pain. I am not the pieces of the dream I left behind. I am. I am divinity defined. I am guided on the inside. I am a star, piece of it all, my soul inside.
So that was I Am Light. Thank you.
Thank you, Story. That's beautiful. When I watched that earlier in the week, I just was taken by that. Gorgeous. Thank you.
Well, I'm very excited to do the introduction. I will not hold us, and I want to give as much time as possible. I know I'm responsible for the introduction. I know that you know the topic. I am very aware that you know of the description of Dr. White, but I felt like it was just important for me to just read two things that really set out for me as I've been really looking at this. It's a work. It's a work. It's a real beautiful work. It is bold, and it is healthy. It is dialectic, and I want to read off of page 114 of Black Lives and Sacred Humanity, where it says, Baldwin insisted that whites see themselves in Blacks, and as Blacks, support the basic thrust of my religious naturalism, which emphasizes a deep genetic homology, structuring all life forms. What I early described as human beings, interconnectedness with one another and with all natural organisms, as Baldwin empathetically states at one point, it is so simple a fact, and one that is so hard, apparently, to grasp. Whoever debases others is debasing himself. Furthermore, Baldwin associates the term love with this critical awareness of our common humanity, akin to an existential mode of being. Love for Baldwin describes a state of being one affirms again and again in the process of choosing to interact one's authentic humanity. Note Baldwin's words. Love takes off the mask that we fear we cannot live without. And no, we cannot live within. I use the word love here, not merely in the personal sense, but as a state of being or a state of grace. Not an infantile American sense of being made happy, but in the tough universal sense of quest and daring and growth. I present to you one and only, truly, Dr. Carol Wayne White. You're on mute, love.
So, hi everyone, and what a lovely, phenomenal introduction, Dr. J. Gorgeous artistry, soiree and a beautiful welcome from you all. Thank you so much. I greet you from Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, which is the land of the Lenape cultures and peoples, and want to honor that as well. And also want to say that I'm delighted to be with you and extend my appreciation to the Susquehanna Valley Ethical Society for this lovely invitation to talk about religious naturalism. And also, especially to Patty for her warm collegiality leading up to this afternoon. And Patty, I look forward to more and further collaboration with you and with this lovely organization that I didn't know about when I was in Lewisburg. So the title of my talk today, and can everyone see my screen or no? No, okay. How about now?
Yes.
There we go. Thank you.
Got it.
Thank you. I had it on share before and it went. Give me a minute, please. Okay. Yes. So the title of my talk today is entitled, give me a minute. A New View of the Human, the Ethical Appeal of Religious Naturalism in the 21st Century. And in the brief time I have with you, I want to, my goal is to provide a general introduction to religious naturalism while focusing on a perennial question that your own organization has claimed, the idea of what it means to be human. And it's a question that is that has perplexed, enchanted, and even plagued humans for ages. To actually turn the question on to ourselves as to who are we as human beings. Another way of expressing that question is what constitutes our humanity and what is the human itself. While answering that question or addressing it, I will also introduce you to religious naturalism. So within the Western intellectual traditions, these questions have been answered in unique ways by luminaries, intellectuals, and visionary poets and writers, and artists as well, through their artistry. And I'm going to just pause for a moment to let you read the various citations, and you might be familiar with a number of them. One of my favorites is Gilbert's Humanity is Nature's Sole Mistake. It's a very fascinating notion. And within the context of a dominant tradition of liberal humanism in particular, the category of the human came to be viewed as a marvelous entity, worthy of wonder, elevated, and unique in the universe. And this particular modern conception of the human is one that we claim today. Some of the features associated with this particular view of the human are derived from classical humanism that developed on the European Renaissance, but without the traditional theological or religious entrapments. So humanism and this particular modern notion of the human basically sets the human up as a unique entity that is at the center of the universe. And within this particular conception, the human basically can observe and assess the rest of the universe or all other entities. Other key features of this particular modern view of the human is that we have conscious awareness, we can cultivate intellectual and creative faculties, we have freedom, and we're responsible. So I want you to keep in mind these particular features because I'm going to talk about the underside of this particular conception of the human through a Western historical lens. So while lofty and beautiful, this particular view of the human, or this trajectory of liberal humanism, has also been limiting and problematic for various reasons. One of the first reasons that I'm going to highlight today is that this tradition of conceptualizing the human has overestimated the autonomy of human animals, positioning us outside of myriad nature and rendering invisible our inextricable connection to other life forms and material processes. I identify this as the problem of human exceptionalism, and will address it a bit later in my presentation. Also, this dominant conception of the human has relied on a hierarchical model of nature built on the great chain of being concept that was actually developed by Plato and Aristotle and some of our earlier Greek philosophers, in which certain processes of racialization and other forms of differentiation have helped shape an exclusionary category of the human, designating who is properly human and who is not. So what I'm trying to argue up until this point is that this wonderful, lofty notion of the human that came out of classical humanism and is part of modern conceptions of human has helped us to understand ourselves on many levels, but there's been an underside to it in terms of how it has been interpreted and advanced, especially by certain philosophies in the West. This particular exclusionary notion of the human has produced violent and harmful consequences, as historical records have shown. One of the case studies has to do with gender identity. And during the same time in which humanistic philosophers are creating this marvelous conception of the human, they were denying certain humans their right to claim their humanity and to experience what they consider to be normative humanity. In this fascinating letter, it's actually published, it was published in 1872 in the Times of London, and it's a satirical letter, and you can read it, I hope, to some extent. The anonymous author basically was asking her contemporary, especially the male leaders of her day, whether women who at that time did not have equal legal status with men, whether under English law, maybe they could be seen as animals, because animals were given certain rights against cruelty, but women were not. And so in this satirical letter, you basically have a proto-feminist understanding that women who were considered to be closer to nature were not experiencing normative humanity. And there are other examples, I'm just giving you a few from history. In a wider historical context, this whole notion of certain humans not sharing in a common humanity and being considered subpar human or not experiencing their normative humanity, what I call tactics of intimidation and exclusion, were also attributed to certain humans in terms of being symbolized as animal otherness. Early examples include Nazi propaganda during the 1920s and 30s, portraying Jewish citizens as rats and mice that deserve to be exterminated. Elsewhere during World War II, political cartoons in the US featured Japanese people as mice and rats again, suggesting they should be defeated. And what you have here are certain forms of cultural imperialism going on. Amid anti-Irish fervor in both Great Britain and the United States, Irish immigrants were viewed as apes or as wild creatures that were to be controlled. Now, I want you to note the simian symbolism, Irish being portrayed as apes or subpar human, and those who perpetuated these particular caricatures were doing a play on Darwinian evolutionary theory, which was at the height of its popularity during that time. This particular view of certain humans being excluded found one of its most horrific examples in the exclusionary tactics of Western European cultural imperialism, where the purported civilized races of Europe distinguished their own normative humanity against other groups they encountered in the Americas, Asia, and Africa. As an extension of what scholars call the nature-culture dichotomy, racialized notions of difference led to disparaging views such as the savage Native Americans and the intellectually inferior Africans. In the next couple of slides, I'll give you examples, case studies from Western European and American history in which you see this particular anti-Black rhetoric being used to suggest that Blacks are not normatively human. In this particular diagram, one of the leading scientists of the day, Robert Knox, in his work, The Races of Men, actually used this diagram to show that Blacks were closer to orangutans than they were to the classical ideal of the human that was celebrated in terms of Greek and Roman art and art form. In this, another major scientific work of the 19th century, Josiah Nott and George Giddon, they were also the popular scientific writers of the day. So people were reading their works, and these were some of the bestsellers of the day. They also began to show and write about using anecdotal, not true scientific empiricism, but using anecdotal cultural views of the cultures that these explorers were encountering. They registered that Blacks lacked the cognitive, physical, aesthetic, and moral attributes that were seen as part of normative humanity. And one of the most famous French philosophers of this time, and this is associated with what we call Enlightenment racism. Author de Gobineau, the French thinker, and his major text, essay on the inequality of the human races. And these are just a few of the many writers of that era. He actually talked about the animal nature of Blacks. I'll just read a little of this citation, because this is a classic example in which you have not only some of these scientists and philosophers saying that humans are unique away from all natural processes, but then they had these interesting hierarchical views of human beings themselves. He says, I have shown the unique place in the organic world occupied by the human species, the profound physical as well as moral differences separated from all kinds of living creatures. Considering it by itself, I have been able to distinguish on physiological grounds alone three great and clearly marked types: the Black, the yellow, and the white. And my friends, this is where you get that ill-formed notion that you had three major races. Race itself is a construct, and this is where some of this particular, some of these ideas are coming from. Gobineau continues, the animal character that appears in the shape of the pelvis. Oh, before I get to that, the Negroid variety is the lowest and stands at the foot of the ladder. Note the great chain of being and what you're doing here, what they're doing, they're evoking this medieval concept through Enlightenment lenses to suggest that of these types of humanity, Blacks or the Negroid are at the bottom. By the way, I do want you to know that Darwinian evolution challenges this. So these people were challenging the dominant evolutionary theory at the time, but they were distorting it and using these distortions to perpetuate their ill-formed notions of race as a construct. Projected images of African Americans and Africans or people of African descent as apes, monkeys, or gorillas justify the institution of slavery, as we know, and miscegenation laws. They also reinforce still widespread stereotypes of Black men as beasts with unmanageable sexuality. And this is an interesting case here. The slide that you're seeing is a case in which a group of people in Pittsburgh were actually discriminating against a Black man who wanted to work in their company. And you might think that this is from the 50s. Can anyone see the date of this? 1982. 1982. More recently in the United States, these exclusionary gestures depicting Blacks as subpar human have been emboldened and articulated by younger Americans during the Trump era. On the top slide, it says, porch monkeys go back to Africa, and it has Trump. So you can see that this is not something just from the distant past. These particular gestures, this idea of certain humans being subpar are still with us, especially around symbolization of Blacks. During a couple of years ago, during a Black Lives Matter movement, a young white male heckled the protesters using, again, this idea of Blacks as apish. And one thing I do want to note that during the classical period, apes and monkeys were considered to be heretical in certain aspects of Christianity, and they were considered to be wicked, whatever. So that idea of even exploiting other animals to advance this certain type of hierarchical chain of being has been part of our history. So I now go to the second part. That's a just overview of going from the idea of what it means to be human, how it has been addressed, how it's been conceptualized, and the underside of the modern conception of humanity. Within the current intellectual landscape, new materialist frameworks and developments within feminist studies, queer studies, animal studies, post-humanism, and vegetative studies have critiqued these humanistic limitations that I have highlighted and given you examples of. They have also expanded and new materialist views of the human and the animated non-human world. And so what I want to do is to give you an overview of how religious naturalism taps into this new intellectual landscape, because religious naturalism is a new form of theorizing the material. And you'll be surprised. A lot of people get really hung up on the religious qualifier. I'll talk about that in a moment, but it's an interesting ecological worldview that I think can challenge these binary forms of reality and the isms that have come with it. So you might ask yourself, what is religious naturalism? I'm sure many of you have not heard about it. It is an emerging school of thought. It has built on some earlier philosophies. But and this is one of my areas of specialization. So religious naturalism basically is a synthesis of naturalistic ideas that depart from traditional forms of religious thinking. Religious naturalism, as I define it, is a capacious, ecological, religious worldview grounded in the observational conviction that nature is ultimate. Another very interesting notion that I want to suggest is that when we begin to think about our humanity, we need to think about what are the presuppositions that we bring to how we define our humanity. And religious naturalism brings a particular set of assumptions to what it means to be human. I am using it as a critical intervention of Western humanistic thought. In other words, I'm suggesting that religious naturalism can serve as a corrective to some of those limiting views of the human that I have emphasized, and some of the underside of a trajectory of humanism that has not served us well and produced some of these violent historical examples that I've highlighted. One of the things that religious naturalism does, it reframes humans as natural processes in relationship with other forms of nature. Religious naturalism encourages our processes of transformative engagement with each other, because we are natural entities, and with the more than human worlds that constitute our existence. And I'm going to explain that final clause in a bit. What I'm going to argue is that without understanding the scientific understanding of evolution and Big Bang cosmology, we can't really understand who we are as human beings. We are byproducts of other natural products and entities. So one of the basic key concepts, of course, is nature. How does religious naturalism define nature? This is given by another proponent, a major religious naturalist, Donald Crosby. Nature requires no explanation beyond itself. It always has existed and always will exist in some shape or form. Its constituents, principal laws, and relations are the sole reality. This is what religious naturalism claims, okay? This reality takes on new traits and possibilities as it evolves inexorably through time. And this is where my theme today comes into play. Human beings are integral parts of nature, and they are natural beings through and through. They, like all living creatures, all life, are outcomes of biological evolution. Expressed succinctly by another religious naturalist, Loya Rue, human beings are basically emergent, composite, material, natural beings. We're ultimately the manifestations of many interlocking systems: atomic, molecular, biochemical, anatomical, ecological, apart from which human existence is incomprehensible. And if you note this particular citation, I'm actually going from physics, as you can see, through all of the different sciences and fields of knowledge as to how we understand the natural world, or what is natural itself. And we are a part of that. Some of you know that we actually have carbon. We're the outcome of the supernova that exploded. We are stardust, more or less. And so that's a beautiful poetic way of understanding some of these more complex scientific theories. We are natural processes. So the naturalized human within religious naturalism also celebrates the fact that our bodies contain the mineral elements of primordial rocks. Our very cells share the same historically evolved components as those of grasses and trees. Our brains contain the basic neural core of reptile, bird, and fellow mammal. In other words, my friends, we are natural. We are part of this natural world. What's also fascinating about this conception of the human within religious naturalism, we're also constituted by radical relatedness. That's the buzzwords these days, interrelatedness. Well, the science is suggesting that that is a fundamental reality of existence itself. There's no thing that exists in and of itself isolated. Everything is interconnected. My friend, all of the religious naturalists that I'm citing, they're my friends. They're part of the Religious Naturalist Organization. Ursula here, a well-known biologist, basically suggests that we are connected all the way down. She writes, not just in food chains or ecological equilibrium, we share a common ancestor, we all know that. We share genes for receptors, cell cycles, signal transduction, cascades. We share evolutionary constraints and possibilities. My friends, we are connected all the way down. Interrelatedness. Also, I want to suggest that I want to just pause here for a moment to say, given the scientific, empirical claims that I have just outlined for you, I want you to think about something. That when you think about our humanity, it's not a given. We achieve our humanity. In other words, we become human by understanding our placement in materiality and our constitutive relationality. Let me explain that. From a strictly biological perspective, humans are organisms. That's what science says. We're organisms that have slowly evolved by a process of natural selection from earlier primates. From one generation to another, the species that is now alive has gradually adapted to changing environments so that it can continue to survive. Our animality, we're animals, we're human animals. Our animality from this perspective is living under the influence of genes, instincts, and emotions with a prime directive to survive. However, and this is where religious naturalism and religious philosophies and philosophies of nature come into play. This very minimalist view that I've just described, the strict scientific view, fails to consider something that some cognitive scientists, many philosophers, humanists, and religious scholars also accentuate: our own personal experience of what it is like to be an experiencing human being. In other words, we're talking about subjectivity. We're talking about the fact that the human animal not just exists as an organism. We have been given through evolutionary cycles the fascinating capacity to reflect on the fact that we exist. And when we reflect on the fact that we exist, we can ask questions of, what are we doing here? How should we treat each other? So we are actually suggesting that this self-reflexivity, called subjectivity within philosophies of mind, actually accentuates that we become human by asking questions of meaning, purpose, and value as we recognize we're a part of the matrix of life. And I hope that was very clear. So I now turn to the third part of my presentation. What are the implications? Assuming you agree with me that this is a viable notion of the human, then the question is, what are some of the ethical, social, and ecological implications of this particular view of the human? With its emphasis on the human as an emergent, interconnected life form. So we are a life form as we understand ourselves amid spectacular diversity, biotic diversity, other life forms. We recognize that there are far-reaching implications that this view of the nature, this view of the human can have within American culture and life. One of the first ones I would like to highlight, and you all would agree with me, given your society, is that this view of the human can challenge the most viral constructions of isms rooted in problematic, alienating, self-other differentiations. Whether we're talking about white supremacy, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, sexual, embodied, cultural superiority. I'm not going to name them all. We know they're out there. they're all based on this idea that certain forms of reality are better than others. This binary differentiation. Religious naturalism, with its view of the human, challenges these particular views or these particular cultural constructions, because that's what they are. They're skewed cultural constructions and forced impositions on the wholeness of natural interrelatedness and deep genetic homology that evolution has wrought. Second, this model of the naturalized, interrelated human undermines a dominant cultural fantasy that is especially popular here in the United States of human exceptionalism. I mentioned this earlier. This notion of human exceptionalism anchors humans on one side of the so-called Great Divide away from all species. It assumes that the human alone is not a spatial and temporal web of interspecies dependencies, mutual network of interrelatedness and dependency. That's what we are. I'll give you a lovely example from the philosopher of science, Donna Haraway. And this is one of my ultimate favorite citations. I love the fact that human genomes can be found in only about 10% of the cells that occupy the mundane space I call my body, the human body. The other 90% of the cells are filled with the genomes of bacteria, fungi, protists, and such, some of which play in a symphony necessary to my being alive at all, and some of which are hitching a ride and doing the rest of us no harm. I am vastly outnumbered by my tiny companions. Better put, I become an adult human being in company with these tiny messmates. To be one is always to become with many. There's no such thing as the isolated human being. Haraway's theory underscores my point that humans are part of an inextricable network of natural processes that make the very category of the human possible. And so religious naturalism, with this new view of this naturalized, relational, emergent human, it helps us to entertain new moral imaginations that can try to push our culture beyond some of the limitations of the past and to think intelligently and compassionately about the layers of exploitation endemic to the modernist humanist project that I've outlined earlier. I'll give you another case in point. We must not fail to recognize the taxonomies of power and the hierarchies of worthiness operating in the logics of dualism and in the earlier conceptions of the human. This is a lovely case example from American environmentalism. And I just want you to know this. While John Muir and other conservationists were exploring and articulated and disseminated conservation and preservation ideologies, and so saying, yeah, we need to preserve land, we need to understand the ecological understanding. At the same time, these particular beautiful forms of conservation were being put forth. Legislation in the United States was being enacted to limit both the movement and accessibility for African Americans, as well as Native indigenous cultures, Chinese, and other non-white people in the United States. You can look up these certain laws. Some of these were, I included a couple of them, the California Land Claim Act of 1851, the Black Codes, 1861-65, the DARS Act, and the Curtis Act. And so this suggests that even in our environmental movement, some of these implicit forms of the logic of bifurcation and self-other differentiation was going on. Another way in which religious naturalism can help us avoid this bifurcation of nature is to think about the different ways in which the processes of animalization have been exploited to subject both certain humans and more than humans into hierarchies of worthiness and value. And my colleague at Bucknell, Karen Morin, who's a geography, this is her text, Carceral Space, Prisoners and Animals. I'll just read a wonderful citation from Karen's book. Fundamental to how and why certain prisoners, and we know who the prisoners are, the ones who have been incarcerated around racial, ethnic, and often gender and class issues. And certain animals can be exploited, objectified, or made killable within the prison, the farm, the research lab, and the zoo are the social constructions, cultural constructions of the so-called human, non-human divide, the carceral logics and social meanings that attach to various bodies and populations. So I just wanted to give you examples of how this bifurcation of nature, these binary forms of understanding reality, existence of life, have been exploited and continue to stay within some of our discourses. So I'm going to end with saying that the aspirations of religious naturalism is that we must act concurrently with other liberationist movements, and we must advocate against the depletion of natural resources, challenge the policies that both create land pollution by landfills, oil refineries, and nuclear waste repositories, which force poor racial and ethnic communities to live near these sites. We must continue to fight for referendums that preserve the delicate ecosystems, supporting whales, dolphins, and other animals. And religious naturalism basically says that all of these various movements around trying to deal with injustice are interconnected. And so I want to just read this citation. Advocating for climate justice must be done within the wider context of injustices that proliferate around the globe. We're not just talking about the United States, we're talking about global forms of injustice, such as historical injustice, the legacy of slavery, unjust wars, international injustice, trade and immigration, global justice, poverty, human rights, and the ecological crisis, species extinction, ocean acidification, and so on and so on. Religious naturalism is positioned to really be a theoretical framework in which you can talk about the interrelatedness of these various movements. I want to end by saying, summing up what I have tried to suggest, that the view of the human within religious naturalism suggests, first of all, that humans are phylogenetically related to all of nature. We are natural beings, we are animals, a certain type of animal, but we are animals nonetheless. Religious naturalism invites you to challenge the most viral constructions of isms rooted in problematic and alienating self-other differentiations. It also highlights a basic maxim that you find in many of the ecological movements, especially the environmental racism movement. Harm done to any one sector of natural processes, inclusive of human organisms, is harm done to all. Dr. J, this is what Baldwin was talking about that you cited. And I also suggest that religious naturalism alerts us to the hidden dangers of countering the legacy of the animal other. Be aware of the implicit speciesisms in our discourses, in our movements, and our various liberation advocacies. So thank you for your time. I look forward to hearing your questions and comments.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah, I think I'm just looking at everyone clapping and smiling, and they, I believe, are going to have questions for you. I'm wondering, Carol, will you have a few moments if we close with our closing, and then anyone who wants to stay for some questions, we will close out then by 3:15. Is that all right? Okay, all right, thank you. So closing for us this afternoon is Mike, my husband, and I'm going to turn it over to you with what you've prepared for us.
Well, we're going to close today with a poem, and the poem is by William E. Stafford. It's called A Ritual to Read to Each Other. I'm not much into poetry, but I found this very fascinating, and the more I read it, the more I completely understood what Mr. Stafford was trying to get across in his poem. If you don't know the kind of person I am, I don't know the kind of person you are. A pattern that others may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home may miss our star. For there is many a small betrayal in the mind, a shrug that lets the fragile sequence break, sending with shouts and horrible error of childhood, storming out to play through the broken dike. An elephant parade holding each elephant tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. They call it cruel, and may be the root of all cruelty, to know that what occurs, but not recognize the fact. And so I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote, important region to all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we should consider lest the parade of our mutual life get lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no, or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep. I suggest strongly that you all look at this up as far as the internet is concerned, once again, and read it multiple times. It's very inspirational. And as I said, as I was reading it over and over this morning, I found it very interesting, and each paragraph had some sort of, to me, symbolism as far as my life was concerned. And I'm sure you will all find something as far as in your life also too. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much. Yeah. Okay, so we'll have time here now for some questions for Dr. White, Carol, and you can use the hand raise and unmute yourself.
And you may call me Carol, please.
Yeah. Yes, Carol. Thank you. Thank you.
Everyone.
Okay, it's open for anybody. Now, I don't have everyone up on my screen, so if you just, unmute yourself and start.
All right,
speaking, that's
I
fine
see
too.
All right. Go ahead.
Hi, Carol, thank you for your presentation. So much of what you offered reminded me of some traditions that I started for myself around, as you're saying, not seeing myself as a center, as a human, but really understanding that this classification, the scientific classification that we're living under was not meant for us to survive or thrive as a part of this ecological system that we're living in. And I think I've come to it in different ways through eco-womanism and through learning more from Indigenous scholars, especially like the scientific part. I met, Elise and I met someone named Alexis DeVoe, who calls herself a planet, and like that to me was so striking because, we're not taught to think of the fact that we are existing also as microorganisms in this world. My question for you is that I'm wondering, like, how does this translate into your everyday lived experience? Like, do you have any rituals or any things that you do that help these reminders stay more on the surface? Thank you again.
Oh, well, thank you. And before I do want to say, I don't know if everyone knows Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's a biologist and Native American elder. and she integrates really well a lot of modern biology with indigenous wisdoms and challenges a very strict, narrow view of science. So and the title is Braiding Sweetgrass. I recommend this. It's a lovely, lovely text. Storey, is that how I pronounce your name? Yeah, thank you for your question and your comment. And your artwork, yours and Elise. Hi, Elise, I think I met you at Drew, yes? Maybe. Yes. Yeah, thought so, yes. Your artistry taps right into my presentation and all. I'm, in terms of ritual, well, humans are ritual beings. Our brains are structured such that we actually repeat behaviors and certain movements or whatever, and that we imbue them with meaning or whatever. So that's an interesting notion of ritual. I'm here by the ocean. I run, I walk I do beach strolls. I'm a vegan. I ride my bike, I contemplate nature. So those are my ways of honoring the fact that I'm part of this fascinating, beautiful, gorgeous set of material, natural processes, if you will. So I hope that has answered your question.
Hi, Carol, let me go next. Yeah, I guess I want to say I'm a vegan too, and I resonate a lot with this idea that it's really reality that we're part of, nature. Nature is part of us. I remember even reading recently about how our houses aren't as separated from nature as we think, with all sorts of critters kind of getting in and around, the interstices, and I don't know. So a lot of what you say kind of resonates with me. There's one part of this that I have a hard time reconciling, though, because it's the notion of sort of ethical human moral behavior as part of that exceptionalism, right? This sort of, and I guess I wonder what your take is on how to, I don't know, how to qualify our morality and our being sort of moral, ethical beings concerned with our environment and things like that, if we aren't separating ourselves as much from what many people consider somewhat rightfully like natural nature behavior and other animals behavior, and looking at, obviously as a vegan, I struggle with this too, because many animals, of course, eat other animals, and animals can also behave in ways that are sort of tribal and conflictual, maybe not on a scale of human beings, but I almost worry, like, if you break down the exceptionalism too much, then doesn't that naturalism start to be a defense of people saying, well, hey, if wasps are parasitically infecting other beasts, then why shouldn't I as a human, be naturally behaving in sort of malicious ways as well?
I love the question, Amir. Thank you. So exceptionalism, I want to clarify that that challenges the idea that we're autonomous and we're isolated away from. The ethical part, I think you could still be ethical and challenge exceptionalism. Why? Because we're constituted by relationality. And the ecological framework that I highlighted, in an ecological framework, every species, every entity has its own niche as to how it adapts to what is the context or the surroundings for it. Now, what's interesting about the human category that I've outlined is that humans, for some fascinating set of reasons, and I think this is evolution, we've been given brains, certain brains that allow us to even ask about what are the implications of our radical relatedness. And when you ask about that, we're in the realm of ethics. I don't know if I could speak with my kin animals about ethics, I would, but humans are uniquely positioned to frame our relatedness in terms of ethical behavior. So I think I'm addressing your question, and I'm trying to suggest that it's a naturalized notion though. It's not, you don't need a God, you don't need some of these others, but it's just part of the natural framework in which we find ourselves, and how I'm arguing our brains operate in terms of how we take stock of how we're situated within this matrix of processes. Does that help?
I think so, yeah, thanks. So it's almost like part of our being is that.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
Exactly. And that's why it's not a supernatural understanding of ethics. You don't need a God to tell you what is right. Think about it. The effects, whatever you do is going to affect others around you. And so that then helps us to say, well, then how are we to act? So that's what I'm trying to suggest. And ecology, and it's not just me making this up, an ecological understanding of reality helps us to justify that as an ethical principle.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the lovely question too.
I see Dr. Ambrose.
Hi.
Hi.
Good afternoon. Good to see you again.
I know, it's good to see you. Last time you were a doctoral student.
I sure was. I was just lost and confused and as in awe then as I am now. So thank you for your presentation and for
all of you.
Yeah, for expanding our thinking on some things. So I'm sitting with an idea and I haven't worked it out. So can you walk with me in it? I felt like you were talking about this idea of Black people within a certain imagination as not normatively human.
Yeah.
And then you talked about how the women as being in proximity to nature was also a lower humanity, or again, not normatively human. So then I started to think about normative humanity. And I wondered, like, is normative humanity like a helpful category? So I started to think, and then I started to sit with your ideas of a naturalized, relational, emergent human, and wondered if that was the normative human of religious naturalism, but also wondered if it could just be helpful to just explode the category of human altogether. So that those differentiations don't hold power.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that very layered question. So let me try to get to the first part of it. The whole notion of normative humanity was a construct invented by these early modern philosophers and scientists. So we want to be iconoclastic and burst that. There's no such thing as a normative human. We all participate in our humanity as we construct it. We are constructing the very notion of humanity as we speak. And that's part of my subtle argument. We become our humanity, and we continue to evolve and become our humanity by not just the conceptions, but the behaviors that back up the conceptions of what we're calling ourselves as humans. So I have actually, and then your third part, I have actually presented my work in some settings where people say, let's forget about the human category altogether. And so I want to say, well, even if we try to let go of the notion of the human, as a species, we still have the capacity to name ourselves. What would we call ourselves? Because on a certain level, we're fascinated, ingenious species. We have language, we can create. And so what would we call ourselves? We would call ourselves something. The point I'm trying to make is that I don't think there's anything wrong with the category of the human if we continue to keep it elastic and expansive and continue to back it up with behaviors that show that we're constitutively related to each other and that we're not going to allow any myopic view keep us in these certain forms of entrapment around thinking who's not human and who is. So I hope that helps. Beautiful question. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I just want to say very quickly, it reminds me of the one quote that you pulled out that talks about how like nature doesn't have to like describe itself beyond itself.
Right.
Yeah, so it's the same thing for humanity. I feel like we're trying to like narrow ourselves down so
Exactly.
much
Right.
that it's no earthly good for anyone. So
and nature's not out there. We are nature. We are an aspect of nature. We are an aspect of nature. And this goes back to Amir's question, but we are a particular configuration of nature. So we can't conflate it all and just say it's all the same in a very sort of non-discriminatory. There are particular fascinating features of natural processes. You all know that bats exhibit and live in the universe in a different way than humans. Bears do. So we need, and that's what I meant by this beautiful biotic, spectacular diversity. Diversity, inclusivity on that round is just so gorgeous. You all know when you're sitting out and you're looking up at the constellations, how can you not be in awe of the many other natural processes of which we are a part? So I'm a naturalist, yes. And the religious part is that nature, I respond to what is with a sense of awe, wonder, adoration. That's where the religious part. And that's why I'm a religious naturalist.
We got Justy. I know we've got we're at 2:48. I don't want to hold you too long, but if we can just get Justy in, they are able. Go ahead.
Yeah, Carol, I just want to say I am so excited because I consider myself a secular humanist, but I'm also a naturalistic pagan, and I belong to a group, so an honor nature. And I actually have a blog site that I've been up since January, putting so many of these ideas on. I have no background on it. I'm just a poet. I'm just a playwright, just from the artist perspective.
You are a poet and a playwright, not just, you are a poet.
Thank you. But so much that you were saying was resonating with me. One comment was that unless we accept evolution, we will never understand ourselves as a species. And I put that on my February website that I'm a freestanding evolutionist, which means not only do I accept evolution, but I think that as long as people try to put together the Genesis lies with evolution, as long as they try to match them, they will never understand human beings because, Blacks, females are not inferior. And if you try, like the Catholic Church tries to put them together so they don't accept the existence of transgender people because it wasn't in a book that they even acknowledge. Those people never existed. They're just characters and they just mess themselves up. So you just have to, so my idea is evolution. The Genesis crap is the Genesis crap and never the twain shall meet. That's one thing. I want to go fast. And the other thing, when the species coming together, I call it the siblinghood of species. That human beings are in the siblinghood of species. And, we're just part of it. One thing with the mirror, I just want to say, and I think you said it too, Carol, that every species has something they do better. Like cheetahs run faster than other people. And maybe like we're more cognitive than others, but that's just like what developed in our particular species, and we're not better. And the last thing I'm just gonna say is I have no idea. I have no objection to calling ourselves human beings, but I spell human Humin, human beings. Okay, thank you. But I love you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
This was wonderful. I want to honor your time. I want to thank you. I wish I could have time to discuss with you, but I will go ahead and email you on a personal level and we can have another time to chill. I don't know about the rest of you in this space, but I had chills. So I will just say that we thank our wonderful, beloved, microscopic companion, Carol, in the space. Adding to this.
I would like to put a plug in for the Routledge Handbook of Religious Naturalism. You should buy. I have an article in it but it helps to give an overview of the different types of religious naturalists that they are. Finally, before I go, I look forward to returning to Lewisburg and seeing you all in person. I'm so excited you're there in Lewisburg, and thank you, Patty, and thank you, everyone. Be well.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Indeed, indeed.
And
Love
email
yourself.
me if you have any further comments. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Love
you.
yourself in the process, everyone, called life. Be well.